A good nerve Shabbos. When we say that there are two sides to a coin, we mean a couple of things. One, that there are always different arguments in favor of or against something. And also that the two sides to the argument are two sides to the coin. They're complementary, interlinked. One goes with the other. They're complementary, maybe intertwined, maybe even inseparable. There are two sides to the coin that we encounter at the very beginning of our parsha, Sisa. God tells Moshe to command the Jewish people to give a half shekel donation as a kapara, an atonement. Rashi gives us the image of God showing Moshe the fiery image of a half shekel to answer his apparent question as to how a donation of money could possibly be an atonement for anything. The two sides to this coin are that reward for a mitzvah can be the mitzvah itself. In other words, the act of doing a mitzvah brings about its own satisfaction. The other side of the coin is that the mitzvah intrinsically has nothing to do with the reward. It's the fact of God extending us an opportunity, the connection, that gives it its value. There's a much larger two-sided coin to our parsha, though, and that's the problem of the golden calf. Just weeks after standing together at Mount Sinai, witnessing God's revelation, hearing God's voice command us, quote, do not make for yourselves any graven image, end quote. Spoiler alert, the Jewish people went right ahead and made a graven image, a real three-dimensional calf out of gold, which we then proceeded to worship. It certainly puts to rest the notion that if God spoke to us nowadays, in our times, as he spoke to the people in the Torah, if you were able to see and hear God, we would surely behave ourselves, right? Here you have clear evidence to the contrary. If Adam and Eve weren't enough for you, it doesn't matter how recent the revelation occurred, or how frequently or how loudly the commanding voice speaks to a person. We have free choice, and there are no guarantees that people will behave themselves. The only thing that matters is our resolve to avoid the negative and accentuate the positive. The golden calf is truly a low point in the Jewish people's history. We sank to this abysmal level right after such spiritual heights, the national redemption from Egypt, the national revelation at Sinai. It was a fast slide, and we've been recovering ever since. In fact, each fast day in our calendar, we recite the password for forgiveness, the 13 attributes of God's mercy that Moshe Rabbeinu learned from God as a result of the golden calf incident. Moshe advocated for our forgiveness, and although he didn't get all of what he wanted to understand God's ways, he did get this password to forgiveness, which we still employ to this very day. Now, every year we ask the question, how did we get to such a point? Anyway, how could such a thing as idolatry, a golden calf, happen? And how, even more so, could Aaron HaKohen, the high priest, be implicated in such a travesty? Interesting questions, and they give us some insight into what Jewish leadership is like in its inner dimensions. The Kuzari, written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, somewhere around the year 1140, explains that the Jewish people didn't really worship idols in the golden calf Maisa. It was a little different. It was a matter of having some kind of concrete representation to focus their worship. Kuzari explains, in those times, all people, everybody worshipped idols, even philosophers who argued for the unity and existence of God. They were unable to resist having an image where they directed their worship. So, the Bnei Yisrael were waiting for Moshe to come down from the mountain with some kind of symbol, some kind of tangible thing for them to look at while they were davening, but it didn't happen, and they got frustrated. At a certain point, they were overcome by their emotions, and they asked for a thing, a focal point of worship, just like all the other peoples had. They didn't want to turn their backs on God who took us out of Egypt. We just wanted something to focus our attention on when we talked about God's great works, like some people look at the sky. The Kuzari continues to explain that when we speak of God, we do it in terms humans can relate to, speech, utterance, emotion, and all that. So really, the actions around the golden calf were understandable to a certain degree in that context. And, the Kuzari says further, the offense of the generation of the golden calf was in the making of an image that had been forbidden to them, and in attributing divine qualities to something that they made with their own hands. In fact, the worshippers of the calf were a small number, only 3,000 out of 600,000. Nevertheless, this dark stain on our people's history resonates and to some extent remains across the centuries. At the same time, he writes, we have to examine the claim of the leaders who made the calf. What did they say? Their claim was they made it as a test to see who would worship it and who would refuse. Really? Really? Kuzari says that the problem is that they had no right to do that. Aaron had no right to decide what kind of test there would be, what kind of temptation to set before the people. The people themselves had no right to determine what kind of representation, physical thing they would have when worshiping. They saw from the commandment to make the keruvim, the cherubs, the angels, on top of the ark. We'll see in next week's parsha that we saw 2 weeks ago. They saw that some kinds of images are allowed. So if that's allowed, why can't we make our own calf out of gold? The reason is because you don't get to choose your own rituals if you want to connect with God. That's why. We discussed this in the past with this example. If you want to get in touch with the shul office, your choices are, you can call 416-229-2600. It has to be those exact digits in exactly that order. Or you can email office@sharetorah.com. Those letters exactly in that order with that punctuation, the at. If that's not meaningful to you, you could dial different numbers, or you could write chief@sharetorah.com, or you could write central command at sharetorah.com, or office@myshul.com. Now maybe you'll reach someone. You'll reach someone else. Maybe you'll have a very nice conversation, but you won't reach Kehillat Sharei Torah. If that was your intention, the way to do that is to dial the office phone number or email the office email address. That's how you connect. If you make up your own contacts, don't be surprised if you don't connect, or if you get no answer, or if you get somebody else. God tells us how to connect to Him, exactly 613 mitzvot, and making golden calves is not one of the options. Now, the people who should have told this to Bnei Yisrael were its leaders at the time. Moshe Rabbeinu was busy up on the mountain, so he didn't leave us alone. He left leadership in the hands of his brother Aaron and his nephew Hur, who was the son of Miriam and Kalev. At the end of Parshas Mishpatim, where the Torah tells us the particulars of Moshe's ascending Mount Sinai, it says, Moshe tells the people explicitly these words, Vel hazkenim amar, Moshe said to the elders of the Jewish people, Shvu lanu bazeh ad asher nashuv aleichem, wait for us here, meaning be ready to judge any disputes that come up, says Rashi, until I come back. V'hine Aharon v'Chur imachem. Look, Aaron and Hur are with you. Mibal dvarim yigash aleihem. Someone who has a question can go to them. So Moshe left a backup rabbi in charge when he went out of the camp. That's best practice. What could possibly go wrong? What happened is that things escalated out of hand very quickly. On a verse in this week's parsha, Vayar Aharon vayiven mizbeach lefanav, vayikra Aaron vayomer chag laHashem machar. Aaron saw and built an altar, which he thought would stall for time while the people were getting restless, and he said, tomorrow will be a holiday for Hashem, which is when he thought his brother Moshe would come back. On the beginning of that verse, Aaron saw. Rashi explains he saw many things. One thing he saw is that his sister's son, Hur, who chastised the people rose up and assassinated him. They murdered him. I know, it's unthinkable that one Jew would ever kill another, but here you have historical evidence. Hur tried to warn the people not to engage in idolatry. People sometimes don't hear this kind of thing well, and they murdered him. It's horrible to even think about, but there you have it. Moshe Rabbeinu had done his best. He put two guys in charge who together should have been able to handle challenges. Aaron, who in the priestly tradition had nothing but love for the Jewish people, perhaps even to a fault. His love for the people took him so far as to push the envelope closer and closer to the forbidden territory of idolatry. He was thinking positively, things will surely work out, Moshe will come back soon, maybe tomorrow, surely no Jew would actually worship an idol, and so on. So Aaron indulged the Jewish people a little too much, out of love for us, but we realize that sometimes love has to express itself as telling people hard truths, harsh realities, that you can't just make up your own God. Hur, on the other hand, was the perfect counterbalance to Aaron's, let's say, indulgence. He wasn't afraid to tell people, hey, Remember the 10 Commandments where it says don't make any graven images? A golden calf is a graven image. You get it? That's a no-no. Hur was a strong leader who stood up for what was right. Yeah, he was brave. How could he not be? He was the son of Miriam, Kalev ben Yefunah, and yet they killed him. Aaron loved and cared for the Jewish people, and yet we took advantage of that overabundant love to do what we wanted to do anyway, dragging Aaron down into the mud of idolatry with us. Apparently, even Moshe's hopes and expectations for the stand-in leaders he left in his place were not enough. Aaron's love and willingness to overlook quickly got turned against him, and Hur's zeal for telling the truth and enforcing it led to his speedy downfall. Moshe, on the other hand, was able to combine both strength and love into the model that a Jewish leader might do well to embrace. When Moshe descended, came down from the mountain, this week's Parsha, and he saw the Jewish people sinning, he smashed the tablets. What was the message? It was a message of clear displeasure and disapproval. It definitely got the people's attention. At the same time, there was a message of love there also. It said, maybe you're not ready for this. And in its own way, it sort of gave them an out. If you tear up the ketubah at a chuppah, then maybe the man and woman aren't really husband and wife. So goes an old medrash. It's a tall order for those who follow in Moshe Rabbeinu's path to embrace both sides of the coin, both strength and clarity in judgment and love at the same time. It's the balance that really we all need to strike in our dealings with one another and with the world at large. The inner conviction and courage to call him as we see him, and at the same time always to interact with others with concern, with charity, and with love. Shabbat Shalom.